Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Titan Law. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with Joe Mutizwa, who was CEO of Delta Corporation for 10 years and is currently the founder and CEO of Pathways Africa. We're talking about leading in crisis. You will find this show inspirational. Joe Mutizwa, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor. You and I were meant to do this prior to COVID-19. Our plans got disrupted, but I'm delighted that through technology we're able to do this.
Welcome. No, thank you very much, Trevor, for inviting me. Much appreciated.
Excellent. Joe, let me begin by asking you, what has been the effect of the lockdown on you? I'm sure you're locked down either in your office or at home. What's been lockdown like to you and your business?
Well, Trevor, actually, I hate to say this, but it's been a very productive time for me. I've had a long stretch of time available to me to introspect, to research, and to write. So, when I look back over the last, 5 weeks now almost, It's been extremely, extraordinarily productive. Obviously, there have been some major downsides. I've been worrying about, obviously, what's happening in the economy, very concerned about not seeing members of my family, but we talk every day, several times a day, in fact. So, very big pluses and some negatives, of course.
The interesting thing, Joe, that you raise about the importance of introspection for leaders at this particular moment. If we all could step back, take a deep breath, and reflect and see what's happening around. Is that what you're doing, or you're in the middle of writing a book?
Trevor, sometimes we're rushing around all the time. We hardly have time to stop and pause and think and reflect, not just on where we are, but where we have come from and where we are going. And I found it, just being here at home with my wife, we talk a lot now. We go for walks, we exercise together, we spend really quality time together. And, it's amazing when you reflect back and you think, gee, why didn't we do this before? So I think it's a moment of reflection, and it's very necessary. It's been a very beneficial thing for both Mukai and myself. In that sense, that reflection has been truly appreciated.
That's good. Joe, let me take you back to when you were born and growing up. I'm particularly looking for the lessons, the values that were instilled in you by your parents as you were growing up, your formative years. What are the principles, Joe, that you think made Joe who he is at the moment?
Trevor, when I think of my life, I look at it as climbing 4 mountains. If I can put it in that perspective. I mean, the first mountain is, as we've just referred to, my upbringing. The second mountain is something I'll talk about a bit later on, about my experience as a political prisoner. And the third mountain is my career. And the fourth mountain is what I'm doing now. But you asked me about my first mountain, my upbringing. I look back with fond memories, Trevor, when I look back to my upbringing. And 3 things stand out very clearly, as it's like it was yesterday. The lessons from my father, very enduring, very deep. He was a hardworking man. He, every time I want to slacken, I think of him. Right to the time of his death, he was always working. So hard work, very powerful lesson for me. He always taught us about being grateful, gratitude, kutenda.
Right.
My father always said, my children, be grateful for what you get, what you have. And he was a generous man. He was always giving. even at times when we didn't have enough, when he saw fellow villagers passing by or coming to our homestead, he would go away and find something. He would go into the house and bring out something and give it away. And we always wondered, what is this? But we learned some powerful lessons. So 3 really big lessons for me: hard work, being grateful, and giving, being generous. From my mother. My mother was a disciplinarian. She taught us to follow the straight and narrow. She really was a disciplinarian. So discipline, but also very hardworking. And that disciplined approach to life has stayed with me, I think, throughout all the years of my life. I grew up in a very humble beginning. I was born in Gutu, in a village, in a rural village. And having both my father and my mother being there, being strong people, very strong, both of them, and imparting those lessons to me has really helped me throughout my life. So my upbringing was one that I remember very, very fondly. And the lessons that I learned from that time are still with me today. And I'm trying to pass them on to my children too.
Excellent. I've experienced some of those at close range, Joe. Let me move now, Joe, to the second mountain. At the age of 21, you find yourself at Wawa Detention Center, and you are there for 3 years as a political detainee. Talk to me, Joe, about the leadership experiences and whatever experiences that you got from that crucible of 3 years in political detention at Wawa.
Yeah, Trevor, I think you're right to call it a crucible. And as I wrote in my first book, my personal crucibles, Wawa was the best education I ever got. And I always say to people, and I say this genuinely, it was the best university of my life. Because at the age of 21, coming from the University of Zimbabwe then, which was very privileged, a privileged life that we're leading, and finding yourself in Wawa under very, very difficult circumstances was a life lesson, really. First of all, I think my big takeaways from Wawa were just to be able to look at people and give them dignity, because we're denied that. And therefore, for me, it was a lesson that I learned very profoundly, that whenever you're in a position of leadership, ensure that the dignity of the people that you're leading is never trampled upon. All through my career, whatever level of leadership I had, I always say to my team, that is a line that will not be crossed. You cannot afford and cannot be allowed to trample on the dignity of the people that you lead. Number one. But more importantly, Trevor, I think from Wawa, I was able to live with a very tough inner fortress, if I can call it that. Everything that was thrown at me later on in life looked like it was easy. All the challenges that I faced later on paled into insignificance compared to the challenges I had at Wawa. I met some wonderful people. People who had been there long before us. Guerrillas who had been captured early during the struggle in 1969, served their terms in prison at Kami prison, then sent to Wawa to join us, but having a very positive outlook, even after all those years. For me, it was an incredible lesson. And I made lifelong friendships there.
Wow.
But I came out a much stronger person. I came out mature. I came out almost like fearless. So Wawa was, for me, profoundly influential.
Awesome. Joe, given where you are right now and the things that you've been able to achieve, I find it difficult to imagine that at one time you were an economist at the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and that at one time you were a management trainee at Anglo-American Corporation. Talk to me, Joe, about the lessons of starting from the bottom and rising through the ranks, from being an economist at the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe and a trainee at Anglo-American Corporation.
Well, Trevor, as you know, I left university in 1981 from London School of Economics with a degree which majored in economics, first-class degree majoring in economics. And my first job was with the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. really writing reports, gathering data, working for, in fact, you may want to hear this, working for Richard Wild, who is a member of our, Richard was my boss, and that was way back in 1981. But I was filled at that stage with a desire to make a contribution to a new Zimbabwe. And I poured my heart out. I did everything I could. But, as a young man, I got attracted, obviously, to a better salary next door at Anglo-American Corporation. This was just adjacent buildings. The Reserve Bank was next door to Anglo-American, and Anglo-American was recruiting. And they offered me a position I couldn't resist, really. It was as a management trainee, and they promised me to have a wide experience across the Anglo companies that then operated in Zimbabwe. And that perhaps was a very formative time for me, being a management trainee, but also being secretary of the staff development panel for the entirety of Anglo.
Wow.
And working with very senior people, retired managing directors, top engineers, going around from company to company, looking at the succession planning process underway and taking notes and being a fly on the wall and observing what was happening. Incredible training that I got at Anglo.
Fantastic.
Really, really.
And because of that incredible training, being a fly on the wall and sitting at the feet of much more experienced people like Richard Wild, as you're saying, you found yourself, Joe, perhaps the pinnacle of your career for 10 years, leading Delta Corporation as the chief executive officer. And until 2012, when you decided to take early retirement, which means, Joe, you were in charge of Anglo-American Corporation during the 2008 financial crisis.
In charge of Delta, yes.
Delta Corporation, sorry. You were in charge of Delta Corporation during the financial crisis. Tell me the lessons, particularly around 2008 financial crisis, and the leadership lessons that come out of the 10 years that you spent heading the Delta Corporation? For me, when I look back to that time, it was a very difficult time, but extremely exciting time for me. And the enduring lesson, when I look back, I always think the enduring lesson for me was what you can do for an organization when you've got a team that is fired up and energized and you're working together. Wow. Even at the depth of the crisis in 2008, I can recall very distinctly that the Delta team was excited. Wow.
They were raring to go. I cannot remember one moment when we felt we were kind of like overwhelmed. In fact, in many ways, I don't know whether we were kind of suckers for pain or punishment, but we really used to love the fact that things were getting tough, but we were also getting tougher, and we were overcoming the problems. But why was the team fired up? The team was fired up because we were always planning what we would do beyond the crisis. We always took the view that the crisis was a temporary thing and that it would pass.
So you did not focus on the crisis. You did not focus on the crisis.
No, not at all.
The crisis.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely. In fact, right at the beginning of the crisis, I remember my team and I going away for a 3-day conference, and we were debating, when will the crisis end? How will we know that the crisis has ended? And what will we do when the crisis has ended? And so we got teams to plan what we'll do. One team to plan how we will know when the crisis has ended. What are the markers? What are the kind of significant events that must happen for us to know that the crisis, in fact, has ended? And another team was working at post-crisis. What will Delta look like when the crisis ends? What will we do doing? How will we revitalize our business? So everybody was busy. It was a time of, how can I put it? I mean, it was a terrific time, Trevor, despite all the problems that we were facing with hyperinflation and all that.
Wow.
So I look back, but there's some lessons that I think as a leader one needs to share with colleagues. One of the critical things that we did was to communicate intensely. You know, prior to the crisis, we used to meet the top leadership of Delta, the top 150 of people of Delta every quarter. We compressed that time frame. We started meeting them frequently, monthly, and my top team every week, sometimes every day if necessary. And everybody in the organization knew where Delta was and what we would do afterwards. And so there was never a moment of people not knowing what would happen. So that communication,
hesitation.
No. That communication was incredibly effective in keeping people focused on the future, but in also knowing what is happening today, so that in fact the whole team stayed focused on the job.
So talk to me about this, Joe. I mean, that's fascinating, that you can inspire people by focusing them onto the future when they are in crisis. What is it that you need to do that?
Trevor, how did we do that? Well, I don't know. I suppose I go back to Wawa. Because in Wawa, can you imagine a situation where you are in detention without trial? You don't know when you're going to come out. You could be there for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but you're planning your life when you're released from Wawa. So I started applying for my place for a scholarship and university place while I was in Wawa, without knowing when I would be released. I got my place at London School of Economics, and I was offered a scholarship by the United Nations well before I was released. I didn't know when I would go there, but I had those ready for me. My mind was always focusing on what I would do after Wawa. So I suppose in a way I carried it over to Delta to say, well, there's a crisis here, but it's going to pass. This too shall pass. What will we be doing post that crisis? So that was the kind of, I remember, I must share this incident, Trevor. This was in 2008,
right
at the height of the crisis, September 2008 to be precise. If you recall, the inflation was going completely off the charts there. I remember when we'd finished our plans in Delta, I went to the major shareholder and took a plane to South Africa, met the major shareholder there and said, can you finance our expansion and recovery plan? We'd like you to buy some more shares in Delta in return for foreign currency for us to revitalize our equipment and machinery. I remember the distinct look on the faces of the people sitting around the table. I said, is this guy crazy? I said, Joe, you're in the middle, you're melting down. You know, the economy is crumbling. And you come here to us to ask for money to rebuild your company. And I said to them, we know that this is temporary. We know that this will pass. And they believed me. But it was that forward-looking perspective that carried the day for us at Delta. Fantastic. And it comes from an inner place, a place of confidence and self-belief.
Fantastic. Joe, that moves me straight into where we are right now. We are in crisis worldwide. The coronavirus pandemic has upended our world, Joe, and has created a perfect VUCA environment, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I mean, what advice do you have for leaders at this present moment? We're seeing businesses going up in flames. We're seeing businesses going for voluntary management and that kind of stuff. What advice do you have for leaders in this season where there's so much uncertainty because of the coronavirus?
Trevor, I don't know if I'll have enough time to cover what I want.
We have time, Joe. We have time.
Okay, I would like to offer 7 pieces of advice, if I can. I think the starting point for me would be to say to leaders, as you go into crisis, as you are in the middle of crisis, remember the Mandela paradox. I call it the Mandela paradox. And this was a paradox of somebody who spent his 27 years in prison, but all the time he retained a positive attitude. He was there, he didn't know how long he would be there. He had some of the harshest conditions at Robben Island, crushing stones with his colleagues there. But every time we read or heard about Nelson Mandela, he was positive. So I say to leaders, you got to embrace a positive approach, but you need to balance it with realism, because the eyeballs of the organization are on you. If the organization sees that you have fortitude and resilience, the organization will stand together with you and will tackle the problems that are before you with their whole heart. If they see you as a leader crumbling, you demoralize the organization. That's lesson number one for me. So how you show up is a very important thing for leaders in crisis. So please look at Nelson Mandela, understand the Mandela paradox, balance properly between positive outlook and the realism of the situation that we face. It's a very grim situation, but leaders cannot afford to crumble in times of crisis.
Joe, that's an important lesson. And my question to you is, how do I, as a leader, manage to remain optimistic and show this fortitude that rallies everybody around? How do I do that when I myself I'm in the same environment that the people that are around me are experiencing? What is it that I need to do?
Well, Trevor, it's too late if you want to find that solution now. Position of leadership requires that you have that inner fortress before the crisis. You can't invent it during the crisis.
Right.
You have to be grounded well ahead of the crisis. You know, the crisis does some amazing things. It blows away the style and really reveals who you are. Okay, if you don't have the values, if you don't have the grounding, if you don't have the conviction and the principles and self-belief, you will not be able to acquire them overnight during a crisis.
True.
So as part of the journey of leadership, you better have that inner fortress. You better have that sense of values. You better know who you are, that self-belief, because they will put you in good stead during time of crisis.
Excellent. I interrupted you. You were looking at your first advice there. What would be the second thing for people to?
The second thing, Trevor, is that as a leader, and we can see it all around us today, all you need to do is to switch on your television. You see the difference between leaders. As leaders during crisis, you gotta be able to balance hard power with smart power. Hard power, in my view, is where you're resorting to the hierarchical structure, your status, your position, issuing instructions, command and control, the normal kind of thing that we see in high power distance societies like in Africa. At a time of crisis like this, you gotta use smart power. And what do I mean by smart power? I mean here, first of all, that you gotta understand that you need a great deal of social intelligence to lead effectively, particularly during a traumatic crisis like the one we are currently under. In a traumatic crisis like this one, you need to be able to understand that the people that you lead are in pain.
True.
They are going through trauma. They have paid a very high price. Some have canceled events, weddings, churches, and all those things that are very dear to them. Some have got relatives that are dying overseas. Some have not seen their children. They are in a place of pain. And the leader needs to understand that and offer support and offer empathy and offer compassion and be there for the people that they lead. That's the number one aspect of kind of being smart as a leader. The second aspect, Trevor, and we've seen it, I mean, we've seen it abundantly in the last few weeks, is that you got to rely on data and science. And you can't just give voice to the people who are experts in your company. Let the experts speak. Let them put their contribution on the table. Listen to them. Be guided by them. And we have seen very clearly that those leaders who are following experts tend to make rational, well-reasoned decisions that are probably best for their company and for their organizations. That's what I mean by smart power. So it's not a time to be a boss. it's a time to empathize with your team. Leaders are the containers of the emotions of the people that they lead. And this is a time when that must be demonstrated. So that's my second piece of advice, Trevor, to leaders.
The third one?
My third one, Trevor, is that, we have seen this, I don't know, some people have called it a false dichotomy, where even the other day, our own president was talking about, do you save lives or livelihoods? I'm mentioning this because in a crisis, leaders face dilemmas. There are no easy answers. And leaders may find that, how do they respond? They have to dig very deep into themselves. That is why the point I made at the beginning of being grounded, of having a value system, of knowing who you are matters so much. Because you're going to face what I call wicked problems that require you to really fall back on what kind of person you are. And this dilemma that leaders across the world are facing is a very real one. Do you save lives or livelihoods? Our president made a very clear distinction the other day. He says, well, when people die, you can't resuscitate them. When the economy dies, you can sit around the table and resuscitate it. But there's some other leaders across the world who are saying, no. This is not right. You gotta bring back people to work, and you gotta save livelihoods. So it's a dilemma. So leaders are gonna face dilemmas, and when they face those dilemmas, they must dig deep into who they are and to their value system.
It's a binary way of looking at things, and I want to push you there. Can you not do the same, both at the same time? Save the economy and save lives. Can you not strike that balance, Joe?
Absolutely. In fact, Trevor, you've taken the words out of my mouth. Many times we seem to get problems that we think are binary, requiring one solution or the other, black and white. It's never like that. There are shades of gray. You can do this and that. And that mindset is very important to have, because otherwise you paint yourself into a corner by creating a false paradox, if you like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
the
next piece of advice, Joe, leadership in crisis?
Trevor, it's to do with leaders always face generic solutions. Sometimes you get theories about management. Sometimes you get, like what we're facing today in this crisis. There are generic solutions that are coming from the World Health Organization. Some of them are very sound. Very, very sound. In fact, most of them are very sound. You follow certain protocols, you follow social distancing, you wash your hands, you sanitize, all that's very good, excellent. And countries and leaders should follow that in their organizations or in their countries. But having done that, there are also local circumstances, specific circumstances that face individual companies and individual countries that must be taken into account when leaders make decisions. What I'm talking about here, Trevor, is don't always follow the generic solutions. Adapt some of the measures to your local situation. And I think this has applicability, not just in this crisis, but in other crises and in other situations all the time. And it's a lesson that leaders ought to bear in mind all the time. The generic is fine.
Yeah.
But the specific must be taken into account.
Again, it's not binary. That's what we say.
It's not binary. It's a combination.
It's a combination.
Very much a combination.
Okay. The next lesson, Joe, I'm really enjoying this.
Well, Trevor, there's a big lesson in this crisis today, and it's about the drive for profitability and efficiency against building resilience. Again, it looks like a binary choice. We've seen how unprepared a lot of countries have been, including ours, in this crisis, and how unprepared many organizations are in times of crisis. Well, we as business leaders tend very much sometimes to focus on profitability and efficiencies. We look at investments in building resilience as wastage, as being wasteful. let me just be much more specific there, Trevor.
Sure.
When companies, for example, look at, do they promote the quarterly profit target? Do they go for that? Or do they invest in redundancies, having buffer stocks, having redundant IT systems, having supply chains that are much more resilient? Many leaders will opt for short-term profits. And when a time like this comes, they are found short. They're found wanting. It's a brutal audit, in fact, on the organization. So I'm saying to leaders, it's not binary. It's not short-term profit orientation versus long-term resilience. It's both. And as you look at the other, you must also give consideration to the other. They both go together. That's how you build sustainable organizations. So it's a very important lesson for leaders all over the world.
Wonderful. The next one?
The next one is very difficult, Trevor. This crisis offers, and I've been reflecting very much on this. What happens post-COVID? How are business models going to be sustained post-COVID? And here you're looking at, as the crisis is hitting businesses in Zimbabwe and everywhere else, there are two kinds of responses. The first one is the survival one. Businesses are worried about the here and now. What do you do to survive? You're obviously concerned about your employees. Do I keep them? Do I let some go home? Do I put them on half pay? Do I sustain them on current pay? How do I manage my cash flows? How am I managing my supply chain? How am I going to keep some of my key customers? What happens to my creditors? What are my relationships with my bankers and so forth? This is immediate. This is about survival. Okay. The danger, Trevor, is that the crisis passes and all you have done as a leader is to focus on those survival issues. Okay. There's another side that also requires attention, a lot of great attention, and that is your business model sustainable post-COVID? In fact, to be able to answer that question, you've got to ask yourself another question. What has changed permanently?
That's a tough
Which won't go back to what it was yesterday?
Yeah.
And leaders ought to be asking that question. What has changed permanently? Because if some things have changed permanently, there are very serious implications. Implications like, are my assumptions for my business still right? Are there certain assumptions I must let go and some assumptions that I must now get hold of? It requires the teams to sit around the table and examine and interrogate that. Because in the process of interrogating that, then we will have to recalibrate to say, okay, we've survived by taking the actions in the short term that we have taken, but going forward, if our business model is no longer sustainable, what do we do? I listen to business leaders and they use this word very loosely. We're going to pivot. Okay, what does it mean to pivot?
Right.
What are the implications of that pivoting? Okay, are you going to keep the same customers, the same market that we were chasing yesterday? I look at many businesses that are going to be affected, not in the short term, but in the long term, medium to long term. Entertainment business, the airline industry,
media,
the tourism sector. There are things that have changed today that may never go back to what they were in the past. And this is time for leaders to put their innovation caps on, to say, fine, we've managed the short term, but long term, what is our business model like? And that's the critical, very important question that cannot be deferred, that leaders must turn to as a matter of urgency.
Wow. And any other lesson, Joe, before we leave?
My final lesson, Trevor, is a broader one. And it is to do with, there's a trade-off, Trevor, and we're seeing it right now between individual rights and the collective. Many countries are staring down the barrel of that particular dilemma. And as you fight the COVID-19 pandemic, in the process, individual rights and liberties might be trampled upon. Where do you draw the line? As you gather information on people, as you trace and follow up people, and get their data. As leaders, we must be mindful of the fact that we are gathering data which is very privileged, which is very private. And what we do with that data must be a matter that must exercise the minds of leaders. Because in the process of doing this thing, which is good for the collective, for everybody, you could very easily find yourself crossing the line and trampling upon the individual privacy and rights. Again, it's not binary. Again, it's a question of looking at the two and seeing how they coexist, the balance between the two.
We have already seen, Joe, I was reading The Economist. They have a section, the current copy of The Economist, they have a section there about the fact that already certain administrations are abusing the data that they are harvesting. And with the introduction of apps that are going to tell you that you are sitting next to somebody who's got COVID and that kind of stuff, that some of this is already being abused. So that's a very important issue that you raised.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, Trevor.
Joe, I want to take you to a point that you raised, which is at the center of all this. Building your own core, the person that you are. And for you to help people those, because I asked you the question, how do you do it? And your answer was, you must already have known who you are, have a set of values, understand, have that inner strength. What advice do you give to people to begin to build that inner strength? Those that have not done that, what's your routine in terms of building that inner strength?
Trevor, this is something that's very dear to my heart, very close to me. And you don't have to be born with that inner fortress. You are bringing helps, but there are ways and means of actually acquiring that inner fortress, that groundedness that I mentioned.
Yeah.
I would say that leaders should embrace tough assignments early on in their careers. That as you're moving up your career, if you are given an assignment which may appear to you to be very unpalatable and not so good, embrace it. Because in that tough assignment that you're getting, you're building the resilience muscle. You're building the inner fortress. And if you find yourself galloping ahead very quickly through your career without any trials, any serious trials, you're setting yourselves up. In fact, you're setting yourself up, because sooner or later, when you hit crisis, that lack of preparedness will show. So number one, embrace tough assignments whenever they are offered. If you're posted to some out of town, out of the way, out in the rural areas, take it.
Hardship areas, as they call them.
Absolutely. Secondly, Trevor, broaden your thinking and your skill set. If you go through your career, and I stand to be corrected, but this is my experience, this is my observation. If you go through your career just going through one function, you start off as a clerk, you do accounts clerk, you end up being an accountant, you find yourself as a chartered accountant, you find yourself as financial director, and you find yourself as CEO. Some people will do well, but most people, when they are tested, they will stumble because they don't have the breadth of thinking that is required to handle a crisis, which is multidimensional, which has got many faces. You need a much broader approach. Do this, do something else. Change jobs, do different degrees, broaden yourself, so that when the crisis hits you, you find yourself in a much stronger place to handle that particular crisis. Finally, Trevor, and I always say to people, everyone I know has gone through some testing period in their lives. Some way back in their youth, as they were coming up, was growing up, there's something that happened that tested you. I always say to people, excavate that crucible. It might have happened when you were in primary school. A very tough relative did something to you or gave you duties that were extraordinarily tough. Go back to that period. Dig it up again. Take lessons from what did they mean to you? What kind of, how did they define you as a person? And I've seen it's amazing, Trevor. I've sat down in class with leaders and I've gone through that exercise with them to excavate their crucibles, to learn from what happened to them early on in life, and be amazed what comes out. The people find strength in that and they become stronger.
Awesome. Joe, one term that you use, which I love a lot, is memories of the future. And given where we are right now, what memories of the future do you see for all of us? Are these collective memories of the future, or these are memories of the future for each one of us as individuals?
Well, it depends, Trevor. You can use them at an individual level. For me, it has worked at an individual level. I always have had a view as to what I want to become. And whether I was sitting in a prison in Wawa without any hope of getting out, I always knew I would come out and go back to university and fulfill my ambitions. Those were memories of the future for me. Those can be memories of the future for an organization in terms of its vision, its purpose. It can be memories of the future for a family. It can be memories of the future for a country. We want to be something. We want to be different. We want to go Vision 2030. We want to be a world-class country or company. Those are memories of the future. And once they are fully disseminated and embraced by the rest of the organization, they can become a very powerful driving force. So that's why I call memories of the future. You wake up in the middle of the night, and you're thinking about memories of the future.
Awesome stuff. So Joe, after spending, like we say, 10 years at Delta Corporation, you then decide you're going to take early retirement, and you start. You found Pathways Africa. Help me understand the motivation behind that. Why that choice at retirement to take a completely different path by starting Pathways Africa?
If I can go back a little bit, Trevor, prior to retiring from Delta, I always knew that I would want to be a teacher. I would want to be a coach.
Memories of the future again.
Memories of the again. I knew that 7 years before I retired, I'd made up my mind that's what I want to do. So what I did when I left Delta, and just before I left Delta, was to find an appropriate course that would equip me to fulfill my memories of the future. So I enrolled at Oxford in November 2012, a few months after retiring, for a master's degree in executive coaching. And I was there for 18 months learning how to coach and learning how to teach and equipping myself in that process. Because I always wanted to give back to people, to develop other people. That's the genesis of Pathways Africa. Trevor.
Interesting. What do you find, Joe, to be what are your clients looking for? What do you find the biggest need from your clients as far as Pathways Africa is concerned?
I think the biggest need is that people want to advance their careers, but they want somebody who has been through the mill, so to speak. They're not so much interested in the academic stuff. They're very much interested in learning from your experiences. And I do share those experiences. But I've got a philosophy, Trevor, in coaching and teaching people that really can tell people what to do. What you can do is to inspire them to discover what they can do themselves. It's already inside them. All they need is somebody who's able to listen to them and encourage them and show them that it's actually doable. And 9 out of 10 people find solutions to their own problems. Everyone I've coached, I've always said to them, I'm not going to give you skills. The skills you're going to develop yourselves. The answers lie inside you. And it has always worked very, very well for me in that respect and for the people that I coach.
Fantastic. Joe, you have, like we indicated when we started, you are so many things. And one thing that you are perfecting is becoming an author. You have written 7 books, and I'm embarrassed to say I've only read one, Personal Crucibles, which is absolutely an amazing book. Um, You have written 7 books. Can you just briefly go through the 7, and if you could, if you've got them there, share with us what they look like, and let's walk through
Trevor,
them.
my first book was this one. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, we
Personal
can see it.
Crucibles.
Yeah.
This, in summary, it says that leadership. I developed leadership through struggles. Struggling in Wawa, meeting challenges as a CEO at Delta. Through all those years, and those struggles, those crucibles defined who I am today. And that this book is about that.
I've read that book and I found it thoroughly inspirational. Your journey and your crucibles inspired me quite a lot, Joe. So it's a book that I recommend to those people that love books. The second book?
The second book, Trevor, is about awareness. It's called The Arc of Awareness. I find that very often leaders are challenged because they are not aware. They're not aware of what the challenges of leadership are. They're not aware of what's happening globally. They sometimes focus too much on the inside, inward looking, instead of broadening themselves. So in this book, I'm challenging leaders to become more aware.
Right.
Okay, and that's really from the inside out and learning about themselves, about the environment and so forth. So that arc of awareness.
And the third book?
The third book is really a distillation of my thesis at Oxford for my master's degree. When I did my thesis, it was really based on a Zimbabwe case study. And when I came back, I said, wow, why don't I write a book? It was a study of 4 Zimbabwean leaders, CEOs in one company. And I looked at their contribution to the company from 1979 through to 2014. And this company it's about dairy board. It's about Eddie Cross. It's about Kumbirai Katsande. It's about Anthony Mandiwanza. It's about the leaders that led dairy board and how each one of them made a contribution to the transformation of dairy board. So it's a case study really in leadership transformation or transformational leaders in the country.
The fourth one?
The fourth one is called the Savannah Protocols. And this book is about, I at some point I felt sometimes we don't excavate the richness of our own heritage in Africa. And I went to look at the metaphors that are embedded in African culture. And I found 19 metaphors. And I translated these into leadership lessons for the foreign investor. That as the foreign investor comes into this part of the world, into Africa, they should know that there are certain metaphors that can guide them as they make investments. Metaphors like lions follow buffalo heads. The crocodiles of the Rift Valley are present at the crossing. Leopard never change their spots. Things like that. So there are 19 African metaphors that help leaders from outside Africa to understand investing in Africa. Fantastic. So that's the purpose of that book.
The next one, the fifth one?
The next one is a very small book, Trevor. It's to do with my career. You mentioned earlier on that I went through many different jobs, and I called it No Ordinary Path. And almost like kind of, when I look at the title now, I worry a little bit. I call it a corporate warrior's journey from specialization to generalist. And I went through, as you said, economist, management trainee, human resources person, marketing, production, general manager, managing director, CEO, very different kind of jobs. And I'm illustrating here that you can be very broad. And if you are broad, it helps you when you face tough situations because you have seen it in different aspects rather than in one narrow functional specialization.
And the sixth one?
So that was my fifth book. Then I also then wrote this book here, Trevor, Leading Without Command.
That's a big one, eh?
It came from my frustration sometimes that we are too control-oriented in Zimbabwe. It's part of our culture. It's part of the high-power distance culture in which we live. And I'm trying to say the youngsters that we lead today and tomorrow don't like to be led in this way. You got to shed that command approach and really adopt new ways of leading youngsters, inspiring them, being inclusive, listening to them, giving them their role, also learning from them. And that is what I'm talking about here in Leading Without Command.
And the last one?
The last one is about leading for the future. And I'm talking here about, again, memories of the future, if you like. What should leaders do? I talk here, Trevor, about the kind of 3 time horizons: the past, the present and the future. Okay. And I focus on what does it take to be able to lead for the future? What is our responsibility as leaders to future generations? What should we do? What should we be looking at? What kind of mindsets do we require? So there you are. These are the 7 books I've written so far.
Beautiful. I know you're working on a book right now. Am I right? Are you writing something?
I'm working on 4 books currently.
Wow.
2 of them are going to be based on the COVID crisis. One of them is called The Dilemmas of Leadership in Crisis. I've talked a little bit about that today, but that's going to be a book standing on its own. I've finished writing a book on execution. I call this the 7 disciplines of superior execution. What is it that we always know, Trevor, there's a gap between planning and implementation of the results. And I'm trying to help leaders. What does it take to be able to execute so that you actually get the results that you've planned for? So there's disciplines of execution. I'm also writing a book on leadership pathologies, kind of diseases that afflict leaders, particularly the higher up the organizations they go. Ego inflation, entitlement, things like that, as a help to leaders so that they don't get carried too far. Then I'm writing a very interesting book called VUCA Organizations. I'm kind of turning VUCA, the one you mentioned at the beginning, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and hostile. I'm turning it on its head to kind of vision-inspired, uncertainty, intolerant, customer solutions-oriented, agile, and humane organizations. So I'm pacifying VUCA and bringing in a new management model that allows leaders to lead effectively, even in the middle of a storm.
Wow, we can't wait.
Those are my 4 books I'm working on.
We can't wait for those books, Joe. Looking forward to them. Joe, you have been hugely successful. I'm going to press on you right now to be vulnerable with our viewers. Have you ever failed? What's been the thing that humbled you in your life?
I failed big time, Trevor. I've failed. I recall in my when I was production manager at United Bottlers at Coca-Cola, Coke Corner there on Seke Road. I was thrust into that job and I wasn't qualified for it. I don't know what my leaders were thinking of. They wanted to broaden me, and I didn't have a clue as to how I would lead engineers and so forth. So I stumbled badly in the first few months. But fortunately, I realized that I had something that I could give them. I could help them to do their jobs by procuring stuff for them in terms of the equipment they needed, in terms of the foreign currency they required. It was a bad experience. I look back at it and say, wow, what did I do? My biggest failure was really at a very high level. I should have been fired, actually.
Wow.
This was in the late 90s when I was CEO of beverages. I was looking at the beverages, looking after the beverages division of Delta before the integration of Delta, of course. And I persuaded my group CEO and the board to allow me to venture into the region with Chibuku. So I led a team to put a brewery into Chimoyo. I led a team to try and put a brewery into Zambia on the Copper Belt. And we almost put a brewery into Kenya. And the Chimoyo investment bombed quite badly, Trevor. We'd misread the market. It was a spanking new brewery, but it was a total failure. And we had to shut it down.
What was wrong? The product or what was wrong?
I think we didn't do enough market research. We assumed that the kind of consumer habits that we saw across on the Zimbabwean side, people drinking Chibuku and so forth, would also be the same across the border in Chimoyo in Mozambique. And it wasn't. It was completely the opposite. And the product was looked down upon by the people of Mozambique. They got habits which are very different from ours in terms of consumption of opaque beer. They prefer wine.
Right.
So it was a complete fiasco. I remember going back to my boss, Patrick Rooney then, and to the board to hand in cap and tail between my legs to tell them that I'd failed completely. They didn't fire me. I don't think I was even reprimanded. I think the board understood that, well, you did your best. You learned. I gave them the lessons I'd learned, and I was promoted soon after that.
Wow.
Which is amazing.
A failure that led to a promotion. That's amazing. Joe, what an amazing story. You have 3 kids and you have 4 grandchildren. A lot of my friends who have got grandchildren tell me that it's a transformative space in your life. Has having grandchildren had the same effect with you?
Very much so. It's a joy. If I could just use one word, it's a joy.
It's a joy.
It's a joy. Even now in confinement, during lockdown, we always talking to the grandchildren. And it just transforms us. My wife and I just can't wait for that moment every day, every single day, to just talk to them. So it's a blessing. It's a major, major blessing. And I've been blessed. We have been blessed, not just in the grandchildren, but in the children we have. An incredible son and 2 incredible daughters. God has been very, very kind to us. And, we count that as a very rich blessing indeed. My wife and I are very proud of our children.
That's the reason we live, isn't it? Our children, our grandchildren, and what we hand over to them, particularly in terms of values and that inner core, the resilience to be able to take a life. Joe, what an amazing story. I have no doubt in my mind that your story, your journey, your crucibles, and the way you're giving back to society via the books that you're reading is going to be hugely inspirational to a lot of people. So thank you so much for creating this time to be with us on in Conversation with Trevor. Thank you so much. Allow me, Joe, to turn over to our viewers who are in Zimbabwe, on the continent, and all across the diaspora, to say we hope you're staying safe where you are. And we thank you for continuing to support the show in Conversation with Trevor, which is a weekly show. To ensure that you don't miss out on these shows, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel in Conversation with Trevor. Press on this red button so that you get notification every time we have a new show. So until next time, please do stay safe and cheers.